And our big story is where we begin today. Sources now telling ABC News the U.S. and Qatar have agreed to prevent Iran from accessing that $6 billion in oil money that the Biden administration had previously promised to unfreeze as part of a recent prisoner swap with Iran. This as the death toll from the conflict rises, at least 1,200 killed in Israel, including 27 Americans, and more than 1,400 Palestinians have died in Gaza. Joining us now, Republican Congresswoman from Florida, Maria Salazar. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with you are a member. Thank you. You are a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I want to get your initial reaction to, have you had any conversations with the White House about additional military and humanitarian aid for Israel?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. We've been talking to the White House, and we have been talking to other members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and we agree that this is the moment to show bipartisanship and show and give all the help that Israel needs. This is not a war against Israel. This is a war against the United States. And unfortunately, we have seen that the Biden administration has not sent the real and strong message to our enemies, China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, that we're not sleeping at the wheel. And in 3 years, if you think about it, we have two regional wars, Ukraine in Europe and now Israel in the Middle East. So it's time to wake up. It's time for D.C. to wake up, work together, send Israel all the military equipment they need, resupply the Iron Dome, send them the supplemental bills or whatever monies they need, and send the message to Iran that we are watching and that we are not going to condone what happened in Israel.
I hear you pointing fingers at the Biden administration, but, you know, what message does it send to the world that there is essentially no ability for the House to pass that additional aid that you're calling for right now until there is a Speaker of the House?
Well, I think that is what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. We do know that Israel has already we have approved some supplemental bills in years past, and there is money in the pipeline, what I want to say. But obviously, we have to wake up, both parties, and start sending the right message by passing a new supplemental bill to help Israel. Not only that, but the Pentagon to be forwarding those stockpiles that they need, specific precision-guided missiles, whatever is needed at this hour to protect the Iron Dome. But it's more than that. That's the military side. It's the political side, that we got to be sending messages to Russia in Ukraine. Don't you think that don't escalate, specifically to Iran and to Hezbollah in the north. Do not try to attack Israel. You know, Hezbollah is protected by Iran as well. But the big culprit, the big monster in the room is Iran. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond, not only with words, but with actions against Iran? We know that Iran is the #1 terrorist state in the world that is funneling not only Syria, that is close to Israel, it's funneling, or it's helping militarily and monetarily speaking, Hezbollah, Hamas, Syria, and Iraq. So what are we confronting? We're confronting a serious military situation, political, and D.C., both parties need. This is the moment to rise up and to send the message to the axis of evil that we are still in control.
Well, you mentioned Iran, and sources are telling ABC News that the Deputy Treasury Secretary told House Democrats that the U.S. and Qatar have agreed not to let Iran access those $6 billion in oil revenue that were going to be freed up as part of that prisoner swap. Were you briefed on this decision, and what is your reaction to that?
Yeah, we were, and we went through a classified hearing day and a half ago, where we heard from the administration, specifically without giving much details, that they do not have any type of evidence that Iran is behind this attack. Well, we know that Iran is supporting Hamas militarily, sending them weapons, soldiers, sending them, giving them training. So when we hear from the White House that Iran is not to be blamed, that's a little bit worrisome. because we know that they are behind it. Besides, there is this article from the Wall Street Journal that is saying that they have evidence, or they have some sources who have shared with them that Iran gave the go-ahead to launch the attack against Israel, and that Iran was the one who trained for a year the soldiers in Hamas. So I think that the White House should start speaking louder when we're talking about Iran and blaming them, pointing the finger that they're the ones to blame. And we have to deal with that. Everything started with the Obama administration by doing that wonderful Iranian nuclear deal that we know that failed, and now they revived it. And that's where the $6 billion come in that you just asked me. It's giving you $6 billion to the #1 terrorist state in the world in exchange of American hostages. Well, now we have 27 Americans either dead or being held captive. So where are we going? What type of message is the White House? And look, it has nothing to do with political parties. This is the problem that we all have as Americans, Republicans and Democrats. But specifically, the White House is the one leading the charge when it comes to foreign policy. I think that the Biden administration should speak louder and use other type of words to send a message to Iran that we're watching what they're doing, and they will pay the consequences.
Congresswoman, I hear what you're saying, Congresswoman, but do you have any direct evidence? You're saying that you've heard reports, but how are you pointing the finger? Have you seen any direct evidence of Iran's involvement here as you are laying the blame on them?
Well, I just repeat that the White House and the intelligence community has been telling us that they do not have any direct evidence that Iran is behind the Hamas attack on Saturday. But we do know that there are circumstantial evidence that points the finger at Iran, because Iran is the #1 benefactor and supporter of Hamas. How do you think they were able to mount such an offensive? They planned it well. They were able to penetrate the border between Gaza and Israel. They had all the military equipment. Who gave that to Hamas? We know that it was Iran. So it's very easy to say, oh, no, it was Hamas. It was not Iran. It's a proxy that has killed or kidnapped 27 Americans.
Congresswoman Salazar, thank you so much for your time tonight.
To you, thank you for the opportunity.
Now let's bring the big story to our panel. Joining us today, ABC News contributor Mike Muse, ABC News political contributor and former Democratic Senator from North Dakota Heidi Heitkamp, contributor and former Republican Congressman for New York John Katko, and contributor and former acting Undersecretary for Intelligence for the Department of Homeland Security John Cohen. Thank you all for being here today. John Katko, let's go to you first. You heard the Congresswoman there clearly trying to lay the blame on Iran here. What do you make of the decision from the U.S. and Qatar to reverse course and not allow Iran access to those $6 billion in oil money?
Well, I think it sends a great message that we're not going to reward bad conduct. And whether they were directly involved, boots on the ground training them, or whether they were simply providing material support, which we know they have been to Hamas for years, either way, this sends a strong message that the U.S. is on the side of Israel, and we're not going to condone this conduct. And by the way, we're not stupid. We know you helped in some way, shape, or form. So whether or not they were directly involved in the planning, they certainly gave their perimeter. And that's enough for us to stop $6 billion going to them, especially when they're the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. So in that regard, I think the administration got it right, and I applaud them for doing that. It's a strong signal.
And no doubt pressure from all sides of the political aisle to make that decision. Heidi, I want to turn to you because we are now hearing that 27 Americans have died in Israel, 14 Americans still unaccounted for, 150 hostages. Is the U.S. doing enough right now and sending a strong enough message right now about trying to bring those Americans home?
I can only imagine how frustrated the families are. You hear these horrific reports. It just is heartbreaking, and it just reminds you how horrific Hamas is. And anyone who supports a terrorist organization should be punished. With that said, our Secretary of State is on the ground in Israel. Israel has received numerous assurances, and the negotiations for hostage has to be collective. We've got to follow the lead of the Israelis, who now are saying, look, we may not invade, but we are not going to in any way allow any supplies in and out of Gaza. And so we'll see how it plays out. But my heart goes out to the families who have missing loved ones and who know that their loved ones are there. But yet this is a very delicate time period, and it can't just be about Americans. It has to be about all the hostages.
And John Cohn, I want to tap into your expertise. You know, Israel has troops fighting in Gaza, south of its border, but we also now sending thousands of troops north to face Hezbollah in Lebanon. Is Israel equipped to deal with this fighting these two militant groups at the same time? And how worried are you about the escalation threat right now?
Yeah, I mean, part of the challenge facing Israel and the U.S. is to deal with the immediate threat, but not allow this to expand into a regional war. And this sort of goes to the discussion earlier with regard to the U.S. response. I mean, not only have you heard strong words coming from the President and the Secretary of State regarding our support for Israel, you've seen the deployment of naval assets, including the largest aircraft carrier we have. You know, part of the challenge is we need to make sure there are enough supplies on the ground, enough resources on the ground to combat the immediate violence, but also send a strong warning signal to extremists in Syria, to other extremists in the region, to Iran, and quite frankly to Russia, that we're not going to tolerate their involvement and interference in efforts to expand this conflict.
Well, and Mike Muse, when we talk about the U.S. response, we've heard the White House, the president say repeatedly how much the U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself. But there is, you know, this humanitarian crisis. The UN now reports 300,000 people are displaced in Gaza. Is there a risk that the U.S. is not responding to the crisis in Gaza strong enough right now?
I don't know if it's so much of a risk that the U.S. is responding strong enough to Hamas in Gaza because, you know, we don't have any troops on the ground or boots on the ground. It really depends on a lot of what Israel and Israeli defense and their intelligence and how they're able to do it. I was pleased to see that there was an announcement that was made that Gaza would not be receiving any aid in terms of electricity being turned on, water being turned on until hostages are freed. I think that puts a pressure point on Hamas in order to free up the hostages in order to exchange electricity. But as you know, Elizabeth, Hamas is a terrorist organization that does not play by normality or with normal rules of engagement. And so I don't even know if they'll be willing to give up the hostages for that, because that's their biggest bargaining chip. And to what John Cohen said about the regional war, that actually is something I'm thinking about right now, because as we have decided not to allow any of those $6 billion to be allowed to be returned to Iran, I'm wondering now, how does Iran respond to that? Because every action, there is a reaction. Do they become infuriated? Because they did give us something in exchange for that. And then how would that embolden them in their support with Hamas? And so I think there's a lot more questions than we have answers.
A lot more questions and a lot of concerns from the White House trying to stem that risk of escalating. Mike, John, Heidi, and John, stick around, guys. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.